Some stories start with a crime. This one starts with a silence. The kind that wraps around a town and hides everything it's afraid to admit. In Rust Bend, a small Appalachian town clinging to its old ways, one sheriff thought he was above the law. But when he put his daughter's boyfriend in handcuffs for no reason other than the color of his skin, he didn't just spark outrage. He ignited a reckoning. What follows is a true-to-life dramatized account of power, prejudice, and the quiet fury of those who choose to stand against both. This is the story of what happens when truth refuses to stay buried, and when the father of the boy arrested turns out to be the one man who can unravel the entire town from the inside. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories like this one. Drop a comment below. Tell me your thoughts, your reactions, or what you would have done. And most importantly, like this video if the story moved you, challenged you, or made you think. Nestled deep in the southern Appalachian Mountains, the town of Rust Bend looked like a painting from the outside. All-weathered barns, oak-lined backroads, and a courthouse clock that hadn't worked since the Reagan years. But beneath the stillness lay a rusted, rigid core, locked by decades of power, prejudice, and fear. Sheriff Curtis Lawton had worn the badge for 27 years. Around town, people called him the Law, half joking, half afraid. He was the kind of man who didn't take kindly to questions, much less change. His daughter Caroline knew that better than anyone. Caroline, 20, home for summer break from Emory University, was everything her father wasn't. Sharp, thoughtful, and brimming with the kind of quiet hope that Rust Bend had long forgotten. And she was in love with Noah Reed. Noah wasn't from Rust Bend. He was born an hour south, in Coalfield Ridge. His mother taught English at the high school until cancer took her when he was 15. He'd earned his way into Rust Bend Academy on a scholarship, one of 2 black students in a sea of well-meaning whispers and invisible lines. On a humid Thursday night in July, Caroline and Noah were sitting in her truck outside the closed fire tower. They weren't doing anything wrong, just talking, laughing, and stealing glances when the silence between them got too loud. That's when the headlights appeared. A cruiser. Her father's cruiser. Curtis Lawton didn't ask questions. He pulled the door open, dragged Noah out, and slammed him against the hood with a force that startled even Caroline. Noah protested. Caroline screamed. But Lawton had already decided. This was trespassing, resisting, and maybe worse. Hands behind your back, boy. And just like that, Rust Bend's quiet mask cracked. Noah sat on the metal bench, blood on his lip, wrists burning from the tight cuffs. He knew how this would play out. Small towns like Rust Bend didn't need truth. They needed obedience. Sheriff Lawton booked him personally, charged him with trespassing and obstruction, wrote in the report that Noah had reached for something in his pocket, left out the part where Caroline screamed that it was just his phone. Caroline didn't go home that night. She sat in the parking lot of the sheriff's station, pacing, crying, and calling a number she hadn't dialed in years. Silas Reed, Noah's father. He answered on the second ring. "It's happening again," she whispered. And that's all Silas needed to hear. Silas Reed had once stood in the chambers of Congress, delivering testimony that helped take down a Southern District judge with ties to organized crime. He'd been a federal prosecutor until an expose and a hit job forced him underground. Since then, he lived quiet, taking only the cases that mattered. But nothing mattered more than his son. By morning, Silas was already in Rust Bend. He didn't wear a suit, didn't flash a badge. He just walked into the courthouse with a manila folder and a look that said he was about to burn down the building brick by brick if he had to. Inside were names, cases, records, Reports on Curtis Lawton that had never seen sunlight. Silas didn't knock on doors. He kicked them open. The town didn't know what to make of Silas Reed. Rust Bend hadn't seen a black man in a tailored coat striding into county offices with that kind of confidence since, well, ever. And people noticed. At Lila May's diner, whispers spread quicker than coffee. "That Reed fella's back in town. Isn't he that fancy lawyer from upstate? What's he doing messin' with Sheriff Lawton?" Silas didn't waste time. He met with a former public defender in town, a tired-eyed woman named Molly Wynne who owed him a favor. Then with Carla, the high school civics teacher who'd been quietly filming town hall meetings since the pandemic. They met behind the closed library after hours. He told them the truth. Your sheriff fabricated a charge, assaulted a minor, and filed a false report. I have the documents. But I don't want noise. I want change. Meanwhile, inside the Lawton home, Caroline was packing. Her father tried to ignore it, but she was past fear. "I called Silas," she said, staring him in the eye. "And if you lay a hand on Noah again, or lie about what happened, I will stand in front of every camera in this state and burn your reputation to the ground." Curtis didn't respond. He just stared at the door long after she was gone. Back at the station, something strange happened. The body cam footage, thought to be missing, was anonymously dropped into the inbox of a small alt-weekly journalist in the next county. No note, no watermark, just a file named, "The truth is not yours to bury." The footage hit the internet by noon. It was raw, uncut, and damning. In the shaky footage, Sheriff Lawton could be seen pulling Noah from the truck, cursing, pushing him against the hood with no provocation. Caroline's voice could be heard, panicked, begging her father to stop. Then came the false charge, the cuffs, and the complete absence of probable cause. By evening, the video had nearly 500,000 views. News vans rolled into Rust Bend by dusk. Satellite dishes rose like metal sunflowers around the courthouse. Sheriff Lawton stayed holed up inside his office, his phone buzzing with missed calls, his inbox full of demands for comment. At the mayor's residence, a meeting was called. Silas wasn't invited, but that didn't stop him from showing up. He brought copies of official reports, witness statements, and 3 affidavits from former officers who had quietly resigned from the department under Lawton's rule. "I'm not here for revenge," he said. "But if justice doesn't come through this town's front door, it will come through the back, the roof, or the basement. And it will come harder." The mayor, a stout man who'd built his campaign on faith and tradition, didn't speak for a long while. When he finally did, it was with a tone Rust Bend hadn't heard in decades. "Then I suppose we'd better open the front door." Outside, Caroline stood on the steps of the courthouse. A crowd had gathered. She took a breath and raised her phone. "Tonight," she said, live streaming to thousands, "we are not just Rust Bend's past, we are its future." Overnight, Rust Bend changed. The silence that had held this town together for generations began to splinter. Families argued over dinner tables. The pastor at Rust Bend Baptist canceled Sunday service to reflect. And at the sheriff's office, half the staff called out sick. Sheriff Lawton stood alone in his kitchen that morning, pouring stale coffee with a hand that wasn't steady. For the first time in years, he was afraid not of Silas, but of the town that had always backed him now blinking awake. In the heart of downtown, Silas met with an old contact, Judge Harold Knoll, retired, sharp-eyed, and unafraid. Together, they reviewed the mounting evidence. Falsified reports, a pattern of targeted arrests, complaints buried under clerical errors. By noon, Judge Knowles signed an emergency review order. Lawton's badge didn't protect him anymore. Noah, now free on bond, walked through town with Caroline by his side. People watched them, not all kindly, but many with something new in their eyes: guilt. That evening, protesters gathered outside the sheriff's office. Not with violence, but with candles. Caroline took the microphone. Her voice shook at first. "My father taught me to fear the world. Noah taught me to question it. And today, I'm doing both." Inside, Sheriff Lawton listened from his office. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like the law. He felt like a man, one whose time had run out. The next morning, a sealed indictment was filed in the county court. Silas Reed had moved fast. With the help of Judge Knoll and 2 state-level allies, he filed formal charges against Sheriff Curtis Lawton: false imprisonment, abuse of authority, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. When the order came to serve the indictment, Deputy Travis Owens was the one chosen to knock on Lawton's office door. The same Travis who'd once called Lawton boss with pride. Now, he couldn't even meet the man's eyes. "You need to come with me, Sheriff." Curtis didn't fight. He stood slowly, straightened his uniform, and walked the long hallway like a man approaching gallows. Outside, reporters circled. Microphones. Flashbulbs. Silence. And then, click. The sound of handcuffs. Inside the courtroom, as Curtis sat behind the defendant's table, he locked eyes with Caroline. She didn't flinch. Noah, seated beside Silas, stared back with something deeper than anger. Resolve. The judge read the charges aloud. The courtroom was hushed. Curtis Lawton looked down at his hands, his wrists now wrapped in the steel he'd so carelessly fastened onto others. And in that moment, Rustben's era of silence cracked clean in two. The fallout came swiftly. Curtis Lawton was placed under house arrest pending trial. The state's attorney general opened an independent investigation into the Rust Bend Sheriff's Office. Deputies were interviewed, body cams reviewed, case files reopened. One by one, old cover-ups began to see daylight. Noah returned to his classes, but he was no longer just a student. He was a symbol. A local podcast ran a full episode titled "The Boy Who Broke the Blue Wall." Caroline spoke on a statewide town hall about justice reform. For the first time, her voice wasn't shaking. Silas stayed in Rust Bend longer than expected. Quietly, he helped form a citizen oversight committee. He didn't care for the spotlight. He wanted permanence. And change, to him, meant policy. Carla, the civics teacher, ran for town council. Molly, the public defender, was appointed interim sheriff. And the town began to heal, not with speed, but with honesty. One afternoon, as summer bled into fall, Caroline and Noah stood on the old fire tower hill. This time, no headlights, no threats, just wind and memory. "I never thought anything would change here," Noah said. Caroline looked toward the town. "Sometimes it takes fire to clear the rot." And behind them, Rust Bend's clock tower, silent for years, let out a slow mechanical tick. A beginning. The trial took place on a cold Monday morning in October. Every bench in the courthouse was filled. Reporters, locals, law students from 3 counties over. The town's eyes weren't just on the case, they were on themselves. Curtis Lawton appeared in a plain suit, no badge, no belt, no smirk. just the hollow posture of a man with nowhere left to hide. The prosecution presented their case with surgical precision. Body cam footage, false reports, testimonies from past victims who'd stayed quiet out of fear. Caroline herself took the stand. She didn't cry. She didn't falter. She simply told the truth. When Noah testified, he didn't speak as a victim. He spoke as a citizen. "I never wanted revenge," he told the jury. "I wanted to be seen." Silas gave no statement in court. He just sat in the gallery, still, a stone presence behind every word. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. When they returned, the air was dense with the weight of generational history. Guilty on all counts. Curtis didn't flinch. But Caroline closed her eyes, and a single tear rolled down. Outside, the courthouse bell rang. Once. Then again. And again. It hadn't rung in 20 years. Rust Bend heard it. And this time, it listened. Weeks passed. Then months. Curtis Lawton was sentenced to 8 years in state prison. No parole for the first 4. He was led away quietly, through the back of the courtroom where he had once presided over justice like a throne. Rust Bend didn't celebrate. It rebuilt. The sheriff's department was restructured from the ground up. A new code of ethics was introduced, one shaped by community leaders, students, and survivors. Officers had to reapply for their jobs under public oversight. Molly Wynne was officially elected as Rust Bend's first female sheriff, and its first black one. Her first order of business? Mandatory community training and a department-wide audit. Silas returned home, but his fingerprints were all over the reforms. He left behind a blueprint, a new generation of law students working under Carla's guidance, and one sentence etched into the wall of the new sheriff's building. Power serves truth, or it serves itself. Never both. Noah transferred to a university with a civil rights law program. His first published article was titled Beyond the Blue Line, Reimagining Small-Town Justice. He sent the draft to Caroline with a note that simply read, "We lit the match. Now let's keep the fire." Caroline, now a policy fellow, would visit Rust Bend monthly, speaking at schools, holding workshops on bias and institutional change. She and Noah were still together, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. The town changed. Slowly, stubbornly, but it changed. One day, years later, a new family arrived in Rust Bend. The father was nervous, the mother cautious, and their teenage son asked, "Is this town safe for us?" A woman in the coffee shop overheard and smiled. "Not always. But it's trying." And on the hill above the town, where 2 young people had once feared the future, a plaque now stood, engraved with their names and a line that said, "They stood when silence ruled." And the town heard them. In the end, Rust Bend didn't just change because of a courtroom verdict. It changed because ordinary people refused to stay silent. A daughter who defied her father. A boy who stood with dignity. And a father who turned pain into purpose. What happened in Rust Bend is a story about accountability. But more than that, it's a reminder. Justice doesn't begin in courtrooms. It begins with courage. If this story stirred something in you, I want to hear it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Whether it's anger, hope, or reflection, your voice matters here. Hit that like button if you believe in stories that speak truth. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next one. Because sometimes, the stories we tell, become the change we need.